This episode of Local Film Talk was recorded in the Green Room at Natty Green's in downtown Raleigh. Perfect for business meetings or just joining friends to watch the big game, the Green Room is the ideal place to host your next event. To learn more, contact David Crack at 919-232-2477 or email david at nattygreens.com. All right, so we are still here at Natty Greens in Raleigh in the Green Room, and we're with Joe and Kieran. Did I say Joe?
You said Joe, but I'll be Joe. I'm just
Okay.
Joe. I'm just Joe here.
Hey, Drew.
Yes.
Drew and Kieran. And we're going to try something a little different. We're going to find out from these filmmakers what films they like, what films they would recommend to people. So give us like a top three. Let's start with number three. Give me a film recommendation.
So I'll do mine chronologically because I haven't been able to piece these in my top 1, 2, 3. But
Okay.
So my first film was The Conversation, Francis Ford Coppola. I saw that film when I was in school, and it really informed me to make a film called The Weaver, which actually screened at Carborough about 2 years ago. It's just a really unique sort of crime murder plot investigation, but it deals with technology and how sort of infiltrates our lives. So that would be my first recommendation. It's a great film. It's got Gene Hackman in it.
That is a good one. I found out about that one actually because I read Walter Merck's book. He's the editor on the film, also the editor of The Godfather, Apocalypse Now. But I was reading his book where he was talking about the sound design of that movie. And
Yes.
I said, that sounds really interesting. I'm not a sound guy,
Yeah.
but that got me interested in it. When you watch that movie, there's some really interesting stuff going on there.
Definitely, I'm glad you said the sound design because that was sort of the key thing that sort of helped me make The Weaver, which is about a guy recording sound as well. So, and how that sound is sort of influences the plot and a sense of the movie. But so The Conversation, I'm gonna have to go with Back to the Future, 1985, because that is just a childhood Hollywood blockbuster for me. And
Just the first one or the whole
I would
trilogy?
say the trilogy is good. I enjoyed it as a child, but I'll have to go with the first one because it was the very first one, and it was a story I don't think I'd ever seen before, and it's a genre that I think I apply to today. It's a sci-fi drama. It's this fantastical, grounded in a reality, and so I really enjoy that film.
Right.
And
I don't usually care for sorry. I don't usually care for time travel movies because time travel just messes everything
it gets
up.
messy. No, it totally does.
But
And
they
then-
actually did a really good job in that
Yeah.
one.
And it was the little details, like the Lone Pine Mall where it was
Right.
Twin Pines, and I just thought there's a lot of little Easter eggs that they really thought about how to make the film and how the reality is affected.
And the thing is that most people try so hard to get the rules right, but I think the thing that they do is they normally take it all so seriously that you're worried about all the rules, and a lot of the plot hinges on the rules, whereas Back to the Future, it is just a fun adventure movie. And so that people can say, oh, but what about that doesn't make sense, and you go,
Yeah,
but
it's
I'm
not
having fun
about
watching the movie.
Exactly.
If a movie is good enough, you don't care about the plot holes, you love it for its flaws.
Right, exactly. And so my final film would be 2008 Goodbye Solo, which is a local film
I have
by
not seen that one.
it's a local
Worth a good
filmmaker, Ramin Barani. He shot the film in Winston-Salem and actually went to Cannes. And I think it won an award there at Cannes that year.
Wow.
But it's basically just the story of a Senegalese cab driver who meets this old Southern man who basically wants a one-way ticket to Blowing Rock, North Carolina. And through some detective work, he thinks that this man's going to try to kill himself. And so it's the story about these two men in a 2-week period dealing with their two different worlds and sort of the humanity behind it. So
Is this a feature or a short?
it's a feature film, yeah.
Okay.
Ramin.
It's a very smart film. It's really interesting. It's
Yeah.
well done.
Yeah. So those are my 3 films.
Huh. Now, where can you? Do you have any idea where people could find that if they want to seek it
Yeah.
out?
So I don't believe it's on any streaming service currently, but you can certainly buy the DVD. I think online.
Okay.
It was distributed. It did
Yeah.
play theatrically,
Yeah.
limited. But the director's gone on to make several films since then. He made a film last year with Dennis Quaid and
Yep.
Zac Efron. I think.
Yeah, and he just worked on a project with Morgan Spurlock doing talking. They basically made all these shorts about the economy and explaining that. So he worked with a bunch of filmmakers in that as well. So he's pretty well known.
Interesting. That's a good choice. I'll have to seek that one out. So how about you, Drew? You got 3?
Well, I don't have just 3, but I'll try to limit them to. I mean, it's whatever I say, I leave something out. I mean, I've always, being a
You beat yourself up in the car on the way
yes,
home.
being a self-taught filmmaker and working in a video store, I watched everything
Right.
I could watch. So I fell in
Took
love.
the Tarantino approach.
I did. Well, he was a good template because I was like, here's a guy that worked at a video store and learned how to make movies. I'm going to do the same thing. It didn't work out yet, but it's so far because there's no video stores anymore. But
There you go.
But yeah, so anything from Tarantino or Kubrick or Hitchcock or Scorsese, I mean, those guys always work for me.
Those are automatic.
Exactly. So I'm gonna skip those. But yeah, a film that I would recommend if people haven't seen is a film called The Conformist, which is a Bertolucci film. It was shot by Vittorio Storaro, who shot Apocalypse Now and several other Coppola films later on. But The Conformist is just a gorgeous film. Whenever people talk about cinematography, they point to that movie.
Okay.
It was 1970, and it's sort of pre-World War II, like Nazis starting to take over, and like how it sort of changes people's like philosophy about where they belong in society.
Right.
Very philosophical, very dreamy, very creepy, but just some beautiful, beautiful stuff.
Now, when you talk about cinematography, and you mentioned the guy who did Apocalypse Now, is it a lot of big, sprawling landscape stuff, or are you talking smaller, more?
It's a little bit of both. There's some intimate stuff, but it's just so art directed and so artfully designed. Like there's a shot in Godfather 2 that Coppola just straight stole from it, which is like camera tracking on the ground and just leaves kind of blowing up right in front of the camera.
Okay.
Like that exact shot is in The Conformist. There's these beautiful like city shots of just this guy in a trench coat walking through a city, and it's just everything about it just is evocative. And,
Interesting.
so just a really gorgeous film, totally worth watching. Will kind of mess with your head with a lot of the ideas in it, but it's a really cool movie. So I would definitely recommend The Conformist. So I'm gonna recommend that as my foreign title versus 8.5, which is probably my favorite film, Fellini's 8.5.
Okay.
Let's see. Pick number 2. Usually for my sort of comedy lowbrow thing, I pick Ghostbusters, but I'm gonna
That's
pick.
a good one.
It is a good one.
But everybody's seen it.
Everybody's seen it. I got to see it on the theater this year. I had re-released for its 30th anniversary.
Oh, yeah?
I got to
You
see
went
it
in
on
for
the
that?
I went, and it looked terrible. Like the print was awful.
You know, I saw the, and they keep talking about remastering stuff and everything, but I remember I actually watched Ghostbusters on Netflix,
yeah.
and it was supposed to be a remastered version. I said,
I think that they screwed up the negative
messy.
because I don't think they could go back to make it. I mean, it was funny to watch it on the big screen. It was really deteriorated.
I was actually disappointed when I went and saw Raiders of the Lost Ark, the remastered one for that one. I swear I saw interlace lines on it.
Oh, probably, yeah.
So-
I mean, because I don't know how well they preserve all that stuff back then. But so my comedy pick, if people haven't seen, is Hot Fuzz by Edgar Wright.
Oh.
Because to me, like in terms of
Matt knows what you're talking about.
in terms of like narrative prowess and like dealing with a lot of information, like he does it better than anybody. Like in terms of just introducing a world and characters and just thrusting you into this crazy story, and you totally buy it all the way through. And it's just a brilliant
he directs.
film.
He's one of the few people who makes a comedy these days, but directs it like a real film. You know, a lot of times, a lot of the big comedies these days, I found, like particularly like the Judd Apatow stuff with Will Ferrell and everything. They get really good ad-libbing actors, and then they just kind of set up the camera and let them riff.
Yeah.
And so it feels more like you're watching sketch comedy or something. But when you're watching an Edgar Wright movie, the shots are planned, there's intricate camera moves, everything. I mean, it feels like they were making a real film that, you know, just happens to be funny.
Exactly. And they're using the camera to create comedy, not just the words. Like they know how to visual.
Simon Pegg's whole trip from the city out to the country.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
well, that's the stuff
brilliant.
you'd skip over in most movies. You would he'd be in London, and then you'd cut, and he'd be in, you know, Stanford, Gloucestershire, you know. But instead, they show like every little step.
And he turns it into a joke, and it's just.
And it takes about 30 to 60 seconds to do all of that. You know, it's it's fantastic.
No, that's a good one.
In terms of like modern filmmaking, like that's the speed of story that I like gravitate towards, because you can just cram so much detail into a story if you tell it that way.
Right.
And then one of my favorite classic films that I'm going to put out there, if people haven't seen, because they might just ignore it based on the title, is Howard Hawks' Rio Bravo. John Wayne, Dean Martin, Walter Brennan, Angie Dickinson. It's an old-fashioned Western, but there's something just really beautiful about it. It's like a confined story. A lot of movies have been based on it, which is like, essentially it's guys are trapped in a jail because people are coming to try to get the guy that's locked up, and they're outnumbered and outgunned, and they just have to hold the town while these guys are coming.
It was actually the film that Drew recommended when we were about to shoot some of the workshop scenes where Harold is hiding in this loft. He was pointing to some of the scenes from Rio Bravo, so it was great.
See, that was one of those movies that I held off on for so long because, I mean, I'm not a huge Western guy, but when I think about what I like in Westerns, I like the big sprawling landscape like you get from the Sergio Leone movies.
Exactly.
I'll be honest, I like Clint Eastwood a lot better than I like John Wayne.
Of course, yeah, different character altogether.
I'm not a big John Wayne fan. And the other thing that turned me off when somebody was first telling me about it was the whole Dean Martin
and Ricky Nelson.
And Ricky
and there's
Nelson.
a big musical number right in the middle of the film.
Yeah.
They planned that very well.
That
Yeah.
sounds
No, I
terrible.
mean, if it came out today, you would look at it and go, oh, these are pop stars that they're sticking. It's just a big cash grab. But when you look at a director like Howard Hawks, he's so smart with character, and he's so smart with dialogue and with scenes that you find yourself just really wrapped up in this world. And it's just a lot of like static tableau, long takes of just dialogue, and you're kind of shocked at how compelling it is, because it should be rather boring, but I
that's
find
the thing,
it riveting.
is that I had every reason to know that this was not a movie I was going to like, but somebody finally convinced me to sit down and watch it, and I was pleasantly surprised.
Yeah,
That's,
it's just, you're just like,
it's very
wow, that's just solid storytelling.
Yeah.
It's a good example of what can be. I mean, there's so many Westerns in that style that follow that template and probably even rip off the story that just fall flat on their face, but that's a good example of what can be done when you do
I'm
it
sure
right.
that whole movie was shot on a backlot in California, and there was
which is
never
another
any
thing that I'm
real
just
West anywhere nearby, but you just sort of go, okay, it's a John Wayne Western.
Like those Westerns where they're riding through the forest and you can tell it's just a set.
It's a set, yeah. I mean, you look at John Ford Westerns, he goes out to Monument Valley to shoot. Howard Hawks is like, no, I'm just going to shoot in my backyard, and it doesn't really matter what the camera's doing.
I want to go home for dinner tonight.
Yeah, exactly. So I appreciate all those different styles. But yeah, Rio Bravo, if people haven't seen it, I think it's worth a watch.
Cool. Well, those are some really great recommendations, some that I'll have to check out. I haven't seen a couple of those, so thanks for sharing those with us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks.